Rogue Retrieval, Part 2. I stopped chewing, the food forming an unwieldy lump in my mouth, while ice coated my innards. They all knew how I felt about airlocks. Delight tilted her head and gave me a particularly evil smile. Gonna have to deal with it, short stuff. You'll be needing to take an EVA. She'll be needing a whole new set of underwear, Tens muttered, and I scowled at him. Whose side was he on anyway? Pritchard distracted me before the situation devolved into a fight. Eat your pie, he said, picking one up off the plate and stuffing it into my mouth when I took a breath to protest. He let go of the pie, and I grabbed it before it could fall to the table, biting down on it in the process. Flavor oozed over my tongue, and I froze. This was, stars alive, that was good. Fine, I'd eat my pie. I eyed the pastries on the plate in front of me while the others got down to discussing exactly what interference Mac and Tens would be running while I was infiltrating the private arm Bluebirds owned on the orbital. I let them get on with it while I finished the rest of what was on my plate, and then I bounced through Tens's systems, infiltrated the Odyssey cruiser's outer security layer, and opened one of the back doors the designer had left to the file storage for its scans. It didn't take me long to work out we'd left Chief's world and his restaurant far, far behind, and were fast approaching the one they were running the mission on. Only problem was, I duplicated the files I needed, found the link the cruiser was using to communicate with the orbital, and slid on into the orbital systems. And then I slid, just as quickly, out of them. Well, son of a bitch! Who knew that sucker was so well protected? I headed for the back door on the cruiser's system, hoping to get back to my own skull before anyone had realized I'd left it, and was not impressed to find Delight and Pritchard propped against it, waiting. I stopped, just out of pixelated grabbing range, and stared at them. They stared back, and then Delight smiled. Among the things that scared me, a smiling Delight ranked pretty high. Not quite as high as airlocks, and nowhere near as high as needles, but pretty damned high all the same. I backed up a step, and neither she nor Pritchard moved. Well, that couldn't be good. It was hard keeping an eye on the pair of them while I looked over my shoulder, but I managed it. Huh. Who knew security protocols could sneak up on a person? Oh, since they were a wet wire. I dodged the first programmed grab and rolled to one side just as the walls started closing in. Scrambling back meant I'd be in range for Delight or Pritchard to have a shot. Staying where I was left me at the mercy of the system's guard. I looked up at them and decided to try a direct appeal. You going to let me back into my own head? Delight tilted hers. Oh, I don't know, sweetie. We might need you for this mission, but that doesn't mean you have to be running it for Mac. But I don't work for you. Pritchard snorted, and Delight's smile grew wider. And who says we're going to let that stand for very much longer? I do. And Tens came through the wall beside me, scooping me up in some kind of net as he passed. We exited through the other wall, and then Tens unfurled the net and slammed me back into my own mind. Of course, he also hit me with a blast from something that left me gasping and wide-eyed and conscious at the briefing table, and then he physically picked me up and pinned me to the wall, knocking over my chair in the process. It was no surprise to find Mac leaning in from right beside him, elbow and forearm propped on the wall just above my head as he stared into my face, even if the first words out of his mouth were unexpected. You okay, girl? My heart was still going like a trip hammer, and I wasn't happy to see Delight and Pritchard sitting at the table, eating the snacks they'd brought and looking like butter wouldn't melt in their mouths. Tens shook me hard enough to rattle my teeth and bounce my head off the wall. Easy there, Max said, laying his other hand on the Comtech's shoulder. Tens managed to combine outrage and disgust in one fierce look and shook me again. Hey! Came out a lot weaker than I wanted it to, and Tens glared at me. Delight snickered and shared a glance with Pritchard. Maybe we don't want her back after all. He studied me with a gaze that could have seen through lead. When he replied, his tone was mild. Oh, I don't know, he said. I know a cruiser captain that wants her flayed alive so he can tan her hide and nail it to his cabin wall. Point, Delight replied, and then turned her attention to me. What were you doing in my ship's systems? I'll take it from here, Mac interrupted before I could reply, turning to replace Tenz's grip on my throat and moving so his body blocked everyone else from my view, and me from theirs. I can't say the view improved much when he lowered his head so his forehead touched mine and gazed directly into my eyes. It's a good question, Cutter. Exactly what were you doing inside an Odyssey battlecruiser's systems? Research, I said, and gasped when he shook me. More? I wanted the schematics for the orbital. Figured Odyssey had to have them somewhere. You ever thought of asking? Delight snarked from somewhere behind Mac's back. I felt Mac's grip tighten. A lady has a point, he said. Did you ever think to ask? I pouted and then explained. I prefer to do my own research. Odyssey has a habit of only telling folk what it thinks they need to know. Max sighed. And you had to use their cruiser. It was where the information was. And hacking the orbital? It's always a good idea to verify the data. From the cruiser? Better than having anyone trace it back to the Shady Marie. Ten sputtered into laughter, and it sounded like either Delight or Pritchard had to spit their caffee back into a cup. Mac grinned, his face turned away from where either of them could see it. He set me on my feet and ruffled my hair. I knew there was a reason I kept you around. Beyond her entertainment value, you mean? And Delight definitely didn't sound happy. Nope, because she's loyal and has the best interests of my ship at heart. Well, that was one way to put it. Of course, he had to spoil it by adding more. Even if she doesn't give two shits for the rest of us. Hey! The forearm across the top of my chest as I was slammed back into the wall was something I could definitely have done without. If the boot fits. It made me smile. Yeah, the boots fit all right. I gave a happy sigh and Tens groaned with disgust. Can we get back to the briefing? Mac leaned in, his face a bare inch off my own. Well, Cutter, can we? I shrugged and rolled my eyes. Sure, Mac, whatever you say. He fixed me with another of his fierce Mac glares, and I raised an eyebrow and stared right back. The effects of Tens's blast were wearing off, and I was still short of the information I required. Minute they got back to their discussion, I had work to do. I'd forgotten Tens was still in my head. I wondered what he meant when he said softly, We don't need her for the next part of the briefing, do we? Mac looked at me and shook his head, and before I knew it, Tens had hit me again with whatever he'd stunned me with before. Bastard. Mac let go of me and let me slide down the wall while he resumed his seat. Now, he said, looking over at Delight and Pritchard, where were we? When the world stopped jiving like it was out clubbing for all it was worth, I followed the conversation from my place on the floor. Sure, I had a great view of the chair and table legs, and of Delight and Pritchard's feet. There had to be something I could do with that. Not today, you don't, Mac said, and reached over to lift me into my seat. As soon as I was settled, Mac laid his arm across the back of the chair and wrapped his hand around my shoulder. I sighed, only to feel Tens do the same from the other side. Now, where were we? He asked for the second time, and Delight continued with her briefing as though nothing had gone on. That's not how I would have handled you, she said inside my head, while outside her voice didn't miss a beat. I snickered when Tens kicked her out of my implant, but sobered up just as quickly when his digital presence sat down beside mine. So, he asked, and I knew that, on the outside, he was watching Delight as attentively as he would be if he wasn't inside my mind keeping tabs on my every move. What are you thinking? On the outside, I was probably sitting as still as stone, my eyes open but glazed over, and not taking in a single thing that went on, since unlike Tens and Delight and Mac and Pritchard, I couldn't pay attention to what was going on in the real world when I was using my implant to do other things. Right then, I resented the restriction, but I was pretty sure no one else minded it a bit. Pretty much, Tens told me and gave me a mental nudge. So, what did you want to do next? Heaving an internal sigh, I opened up the schematics I'd pulled on the orbital and laid them alongside the scan data I'd pinched from the cruiser. What do you see? I asked, and he cast a soft blue streak. Digital me smiled. I know, right? Because everything might be just fine for Delight to undertake her mission, but it sure as shit wasn't going to be okay for me to work mine. Are you sure? I shrugged. Have to get into the orbital systems and hack Bluebird's security feed to be 100%, I said, but yeah, pretty much. Tens nodded. Let's do that then. If I'd been on the outside, I might have stared at him, partly because I'd never expected him to approve, but mostly because I definitely hadn't expected him to help. Only way to keep you out of trouble, he said, as though that explained everything, which it did, I suppose, especially when you included delight and odyssey as part of your definition of trouble. There was still no way in all the stars I was going to let him know just how much I appreciated him coming. None. Nada, zip, and zilch. So I tried for nonchalant. Fine, I guess you can tag along. He laughed and gave me a mental punch in the shoulder. Ow! Quit your bitchin'. And wasn't that just the time for Mac to take a peek and see what we were up to? I can hold the fort while you're gone. It was both blessing and permission, and Tens didn't wait for more. Come on, Trouble, he said, taking hold of my mental hand and bouncing us both through the cruiser's systems like he had any more business being there than I'd had when I'd done the same thing. I can get us back to our heads, even if they notice us, he told me, and I'm pretty sure he hadn't meant to rub in the fact that getting back to my own head was something I hadn't been able to manage the last time I was out. Maybe. Once through the cruiser, we discovered that getting into the orbital systems was a lot more difficult, but not impossible, as TENS soon proved. I learned a few new things and filed them away for later, wondering if he'd share the programs with me or if I'd have to design my own. Not a hope in all the stars, he said, which pretty much answered that. I was tempted to leave him on his own, but it was my mission, and Odyssey weren't the only ones who were selective about the data they fed their operatives. Nice, Ten said, but he was sorting through files and too busy to do much more than grumble, which reminded me that I should be the one looking through files, seeing as it was me who knew what I needed. Tens didn't stop his sorting. Race you, he challenged, not shifting over to give me any room. You think? And it was on. I ducked around him, making my own space in the server and digging in until I came up with what I wanted.